1989. The far north of Russia. A railway somewhere in the wilderness. A train rattles along the tracks, taking home construction workers, their hands rough and tired from work. The sleeper car smells of diesel and cheap canned stew. The young people are laughing, pulling out guitars, sharing memories of the northern summer, how they lived in trailers, how they built walls and bridges, how they earned their first real money in these train cars. It's easy to believe that your whole life is ahead of you. College, a diploma, love, a home, work, kids. The construction crew is almost like a summer camp for adults. Songs with a guitar, the romance of distant roads, the feeling that your country needs you. None of the guys believe anything bad could happen to them. The train rattles along cheerfully, and the tundra flashes by the windows as usual. But the north isn't only about construction sites, it also has prison camps, and not only students travel those tracks. Among the cheerful faces in the train corridors, there might be strangers, silent, with heavy gazes, and no one checks who exactly gets on the train car. At a small northern station. In Soviet times, it wasn't necessary to show your passport to the conductor, and there was no security on the trains yet. At night, chatter and guitar music faded, and passengers dozed off to the sound of the wheels. A woman woke up from a troubled dream, looked around in the dim light, felt for our passengers' cigarettes and matches on the table, sleepily wandered into the vestibule, opened the door, and froze for a second, then ran away screaming in terror. In the vestibule lay the body of a young student in a construction team jacket. The floor was covered in blood. Unfortunately, due to YouTube's censorship, I can't show some documentary materials, so I will leave them out. Go to the Strashnoti Telegram channel, subscribe and watch. The link is under the video. We need to call the police, but where can you find them in such a remote place? The pale train chief rushed over, out of breath, examined the guy found in the vestibule, and tried to feel for a pulse. Nothing can be done now. The person is dead with a gaping chest wound over the heart. The chief ordered the conductor to urgently send a radio message to the nearest station. And who could have done such a thing? There was no noise. No one argued or fought. Maybe it was a robbery? The construction crew earned a decent salary. A terrified conductor from another car came running with more terrible news. Another body had been found on the train. A young woman was found dead in the vestibule 2 cars away from here with the same wound on her chest. The second victim was also wearing a construction crew jacket. Maybe the guys were traveling together and there was a scene of jealousy here, but the girl's pockets were turned inside out, so it was a robbery after all. The train attendant looks pale. Both vestibules are locked and there's no radio or cell signal. It's 3 hours to the nearest station, but the train keeps moving. The wheels are clattering. People look at each other with anxiety, trying to figure out who among them is a stranger, who is the executioner sitting somewhere nearby, breathing the same stale air. The train cars, which just an hour ago were buzzing with conversations, laughter, and guitar strumming, have frozen in a sticky silence. The girl with the guitar hid her instrument under the bunk, as if that could save her. The men gathered in groups by the passageway, talking among themselves. Someone suggested patrolling the car until morning, but that didn't make things any easier. The criminal could be anyone. The sullen guy in the sweater, the gloomy old man by the window, or someone from the construction crew. The 3-hour journey dragged on, the clatter of the wheels marking the time until an unknown outcome. The echoing speaker in the corridor crackled and rasped, and the voice of the train chief, breaking and with a distinct northern accent, came through. He gave the order not to leave our seats. Only go to the restroom in groups of 3 or 4 people, or better yet, just hold it. It only got scarier as we approached the station. There was whispering in the carriage. Someone was sobbing, someone else wiped their forehead with a sleeve. The train thundered through the winter tundra like a locked iron box, with dozens of people inside and one unknown executioner. The air grew heavy, time dragged on slowly, black poles and snowy emptiness flashed past the windows. An hour passed, then another. The station was already close, the city lay ahead. Soon the police would arrive, everything would be cleared up, everything would work out. And people grew bolder, began to straighten up, carefully pulling their backs away from the walls. Someone stepped into the corridor, someone went to the vestibule, looking around. The whispering was replaced by quiet conversations. The conductor took off her scarf and wiped her forehead. The passengers became livelier, as if they had completely forgotten about the danger, even though the murderer couldn't have disappeared anywhere from the locked metal box. And every step in the corridor, every creak of a door sounded like a warning. When there were only a few kilometers left to the station, the hungry passengers began to gather in the dining car. Someone laughs out of place, someone jokes, someone digs into their food, and then a woman screams so chilling it sent shivers down to the bone. Help! There, in the vestibule by the dining car, lay the third body, a young father, a guy just like the previous victims, light hair, a Komsomol badge on his chest. And again, everything happened silently. No one noticed any screams or struggle. At the station, the train stood as if chained for 10 long hours, the platform filled with investigators and detectives. The dogs led people out one by one, checked their documents, and questioned them about whom they had seen, who sat where, and who talked to whom. In the train cars, there were overturned shelves, opened bags, and strangers' hands in personal belongings. The victims turned out to be Komsomol members from a construction crew, young, hard-working and determined guys. They were bringing home pretty big salaries for those times, and the villain emptied their pockets. There were no signs of a struggle. Each one was killed with a single precise, professional knife strike to the heart. Experts looking at the wounds shook their heads. The knife went in quickly and deeply, and then the criminal twisted it to be sure. It was clear that these 3 strikes were delivered by one person. The train chief stood aside, white and pale. Among the passengers there were neither witnesses nor suspects, and the outer door of one of the cars had been broken into. Someone jumped off the moving train and vanished into the tundra near the station. A few months later in winter, 2 kilometers from Kirov, at the edge of the forest, the body of a man was found. The deceased was lying in the snow nearby. The tire tracks led investigators to check missing persons reports, and the deceased turned out to be a taxi driver, Sergei Metyolkin. He was one of those rare people who were called a decent guy. He didn't drink, never rude to passengers, loved his wife and his little daughter. Unlike many of his colleagues, he never inflated the fare and never took money over the meter. Sergei was repeatedly scolded at the depot, threatened with firing, and told to bring in extra money, but he just brushed it off. I work honestly and suggest you do the same. Shortly before his death, they had a serious conflict. Metelkin was planning to file a complaint with the prosecutor's office. After their next shift, they fought, and then he disappeared. He was found a few days later in a remote forest on a snowy road where no one had driven for a long time. The official Volga disappeared along the tracks. It was clear Sergei fought desperately, but there were several attackers. Experts said there were 3. One precise stab to the chest, and it was over. Sergei was robbed. It didn't help. They took his old shoes from his cooling body and stole the car. After the taxi driver was killed, the police decided it was most likely someone local. They blocked off the area and set up an ambush on the forest roads. One evening, one of the posts noticed something strange. A felled tree suddenly fell in front of an approaching car's headlights, and 2 masked men jumped out from behind it and rushed toward the driver. The police officers acted quickly and apprehended the attackers on the spot. But instead of hardened criminals, the 2 turned out to be teenagers from neighboring villages. The guys admitted that they had heard someone was stealing cars in the area and decided to try it themselves. They had nothing to do with the taxi driver's death. The investigation reached a dead end, and meanwhile, the criminals went out hunting again. That evening, Sergeant Alexander Kadrin and his friend Gennady Sinitsyn were returning home after a meeting with their fellow servicemen. Kadrin was driving, he hadn't been drinking, and decided to drive himself, while Sinitsyn sat next to him. At one of the turns, they saw some hitchhikers on the roadside and Kadrin stopped. It was a cold night, the road was long and you never abandon your own. Two of them got in the back. At first they rode in silence, then one of them asked, "Stop here, I need to get out." Kadrin pulled over to the side. The door clicked. The man leaned forward and suddenly pulled out a knife. One quick stab with a twist. The sergeant didn't even have time to cry out. Gennady was immediately pushed out of the car, kicked toward the ditch, beaten, threatened, and laughed at. They found a canister with some gasoline left in the car. The bandits poured gasoline on Sinitsyn's jacket and set it on fire. The flames caught the sleeve, and Gennady, blinded by terror, rushed into the forest, tearing off the burning jacket as he ran. Snow, branches, darkness. He stumbled, fell, crawled until he froze under a fallen tree. The bandits rushed after him, but lost him in the darkness. They shouted for a while, ran along the edge of the forest, and then left. Gennady wandered the forest for 3 more hours, confused about his location and situation. He had no jacket, burned hands, ringing ears, and darkness before his eyes. He wandered aimlessly, grabbing branches, falling into snow, and getting back up. It seemed like it was all endless. Snow, trees, animal tracks, and the rasp of his own breathing. Finally, a light appeared ahead. A village. He reached the first house and collapsed right on the porch. The hostess screamed, then realized it was a living person, burned, covered in blood. Her husband ran to get help, and they called for doctors and the police. At the hospital, Gennady was taken to the intensive care unit. There, under 4 drips, he learned the terrible news. His colleague had been found dead, stabbed in the heart, a deep wound, with a twist. The nature of the crime turned out to be suspiciously similar to the killing of the taxi driver Sergei Metelkin. At first, Gennady couldn't remember anything. He only talked about running into the forest in a burning jacket. But gradually, day by day, the doctor's phrases and the investigator's questions triggered flashes of memories in his mind. And soon he pointed out an important detail, a melodic accent he heard in the car, when everything still seemed safe. That voice, drawn out, like someone from the south or a newcomer from the outskirts, was the only thing he could hold on to. For the investigators, this became a turning point. It meant that most likely the criminal was not from the Kirov region. The melodic accent, the unfamiliar mannerisms, the pattern of the crimes, all of this suggested that the bandits could have been outsiders. Urgent bulletins were sent out from the district department. Across the country, every similar case was checked. Murders, car thefts, attacks on drivers. It soon became clear that there had been more than a dozen such attacks. All of them were the same, a single precise stab with a twist as if it was a practiced move. Several of the attacks were accompanied by car theft. The information was collected, compiled, and sent to Moscow. Behind closed doors, they started piecing together the puzzle. The same modus operandi stretched across hundreds of kilometers, from a train in the north to the forest roads near Moscow. In Kirov, they realized this wasn't a random gang or some village kids. This was a predator moving across the country, leaving a bloody trail behind. Now, all that was left was to find him before he struck again. Meanwhile, the criminals were lying low. For many months, there were no new clues in the case. The breakthrough in the investigation happened unexpectedly when one of the informants in the colony passed on some information. A new inmate accused of abuse bragged he had more bodies than everyone else in the cell combined. The guy wanted to boost his reputation among his cellmates and ended up giving himself away. Immediately and quietly, they moved him to Kirov and began questioning him. His name was Alexei Dolgov, at the lowest point of his life, and he had no alibi. The investigators acted tough, warning that his accomplices might eliminate him as an unnecessary witness, and no one would know where he vanished. Dolgov turned pale. Too many things matched up, and then he broke down. The guy confessed that he took part in attacks on taxi drivers. They stole the cars, drove them to the Transcaucasian republics, and sold them for cash. The leader was Rinat Guseynov, confident, cunning, and cold. Later, his brothers joined him. According to Dolgov, it was this gang that left a bloody trail across the entire Union. Even after Dolgov's arrest, one name was whispered: Rinat. For the detectives, he was a seasoned repeat offender, and for his own people, he was like a master and an executioner. Arguing with him was more trouble than it was worth, according to his former accomplices. Dolgov, who had already agreed to cooperate with the investigation, did not hide the fact that even those who robbed and killed people with Guseynov were afraid of him. He could appear calm for hours and then suddenly fly into a rage, turning into an uncontrollable machine of violence. According to Dolgov, after one of the attacks, Rinat, as if he had lost all humanity, jumped on the victim's body like a beast and shouted wild, meaningless words that sounded like a battle cry. "Meat! Meat!" he shouted, and at that moment everyone else's hair stood on end. The people who were nearby saw it and understood. That's how a person acts when he enjoys his own cruelty. One of his accomplices later admitted, "That's when we realized he had no brakes. He could even turn on us." For the investigators, these confessions became further proof that Guseynov was not just a gang leader, but a man who needed the feeling of power, humiliation, and fear. He made the rules himself, punished his own people, and did not tolerate disobedience. In the detention center cell, the operatives specifically emphasized him. Even those who spent their whole lives in colonies and camps were afraid of him. He was not only a leader, but also a terrifying symbol of their small gang. For those who will never flinch and will go all the way, even if they have to take out one of their own. When they ran a check on Rinat Guseynov, the investigators didn't believe the results at first. The gang leader, experienced and cautious, was suddenly already in prison for something stupid. It all looked as if he had gone into hiding on his own. His arrest would be laughable if not for the blood behind it. Guseynov was sitting in a restaurant with his mistress. Over the evening, he managed to get drunk, throw money at the waiter, and give the girl a gold ring. The gesture was showy, meant for the public. The girl gasped, and it was exactly her excitement that attracted extra attention. And from Guseynov's pocket, a sawed-off shotgun fell right at the feet of a police officer sitting at the next table. Everything happened instantly after that. Handcuffs, a report, interrogations. For possession of a weapon, the court gave 2 years. For an experienced criminal, that's nothing. It seemed that Rinat realized the noose was tightening and chose to hide behind bars for a while, hoping to wait it out until things calmed down. He was brought in for questioning again, sitting silently and staring somewhere over the investigators' heads as if none of this concerned him. No confessions, no emotions. He was returned to his cell, but now they were watching him especially closely. A couple of days later, the operatives got a new lead. A note intercepted from Guseynov, written in small handwriting and passed to the outside through trusted people. "Leave immediately. My acquaintance Tatiana will give you the money. Before I left, I gave her a large gold ring. Let her pay you in full with it." The operatives immediately started to find out who this Tatiana was. She turned out to be a married woman with a young daughter. Her affair with Rinat was a spark in her grey everyday life. Expensive gifts, secret meetings, long conversations. Now he was making her an intermediary in the gang's escape. Even before the investigators figured out which Tatiana they were talking about, people showed up at her apartment door. Guseynova, the ring Rinat wrote about, Tatiana pawned it. They cheated her, gave her pennies, and demanded her passport. Nervous, she had no choice. A few days later, 3 men in leather jackets with rough faces broke into her apartment. They knew exactly where they were going and why. They reminded her of the gifts, the expensive ring, the warm evenings with Rinat. One of them tied Tatiana's husband to the hot radiator. The others pulled her sleeping daughter out of bed and threw her onto the couch. The apartment became a cage. And then the doorbell rang, sharp, insistent. For a few seconds, there was a ringing silence as the bandits exchanged tense glances. The police officers neared the door, behind which odd noises came, at times a child's cry, at others a harsh male voice. One of the officers whispered, I'll pretend to be a neighbor." He rang the doorbell and said loudly, "This is your downstairs neighbor. What's going on up there? I'm about to call the police." There was a rustling sound behind the door. The bandits exchanged quick glances. One grabbed a knife, hissed, "I'll take care of it now," and the lock clicked. At that moment, the door flew open and the assault team burst in. The knife-wielding bandit lunged, but was hit in the chest with a rifle butt and collapsed, sliding across the linoleum. The second was pinned by the radiator. The third, holding the girl, was thrown aside. The child screamed briefly, then all went quiet. The bandits were on the floor, their hands behind their backs with the dry click of handcuffs. Tatiana, pale, stood by the wall, unable to believe it was all over. The handcuffs snapped shut, and the usual arrogance of the bandits disappeared instantly. Bags with belongings were scattered around the apartment. Torn envelopes, gold chains. It was pointless to deny anything. Behind the bandits trailed a bloody path. Witnesses, evidence, fingerprints on the weapons. For the first time in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, investigators conducted a new scent trace examination. The dogs, without hesitation, identified the very people who had just been apprehended by the officers. The scent traces from the seats, floor mats, and door handles matched exactly. There was no doubt. It was these very hands that held the knife, these very boots that trampled the ground near the ditch where the taxi driver was found. If you want even more videos, visit Boosty if you're from Russia, and Patreon if you're not from Russia. There you'll find exclusive videos that aren't on YouTube. The links are below the video. During the interrogations, 2 of them broke down almost immediately. All their bravado turned into fear. They told how they waited for drivers, how they stole Volgas, how they sold the cars abroad, and how they split the money. Only Guseynov sat there staring at the floor and kept silent, as if none of this concerned him. He maintained the image of an untouchable leader, while his accomplices gradually gave up every detail of their routes, every killing, every car. Guseynov, confident in his impunity, quickly found a weak link in the detention center. One guard was also from his region, a naive, trusting simpleton from the village. Guseynov took a closer look, thought it over, and realized he could try to escape. When the guard was handing out gruel, the prisoner's hands shot out of the hatch like octopuses. They grabbed the corridor guard by the wrist, squeezed his fingers painfully, and pulled his arm deeper into the window. Guseynov whispered coldly, "Either you help us, or we'll cut your hand off right here." He promised that his relatives would get to the poor guy no matter what, if he chickened out. Cornered. The corridor guard gave hacksaws and a secret prison map to Guseynov. At night, a metallic scraping sound echoed in the cell as the prisoners sawed through the window bars, covering the cuts with breadcrumbs and black putty. Everything built up to the escape, but one small detail ruined it. During a sudden inspection, the officer leaned toward the window and felt metal shavings with his finger. He looked closer and saw a thin, light line on the bars. The escape was foiled. Guseynov was taken out, the cell was searched, they found hacksaws, a note with a plan, the guard was arrested, and an investigation began. But even then, Rinat didn't say a word. He sat there, looking through people as if none of it concerned him, as if he was still free and could decide for himself when and with whom to speak. The investigators no longer hoped he would talk, until one day a letter arrived from the outside. Valentina, his longtime friend, had given birth. Guseynov held the thin envelope for a long time, silently mouthing the lines as he read. After that, for the first time, he asked to meet with the investigators himself. "If you want the truth, let me have a meeting with Valentina and my son." It seemed like a fairy tale, but they agreed. They found the woman in a week, brought her to the detention center, and Valentina was brought into the visiting room with the baby. There was glass, bars, a stool, everything as it should be. But at that moment, Guseynov didn't look like a bandit, but like an ordinary person. He reached out his hands to the baby, tiny, warm, and for the first time his gaze softened. He and Valentina held hands through the bars and cried. He is a hardened leader, and she is a tired woman who brought a baby to the visit. There was no legendary cold-bloodedness left in this room, only a man who was shown his son. Then Guseynov started talking. He began recalling names, cars, addresses, describing attacks and resale schemes. The investigators sat across from him, listening and understanding. It was for this very moment, for this illusion of a normal life, that he finally decided to reveal everything he had been hiding for so many months during the interrogations. Rinat Guseynov revealed his biography, as if he were reading a criminal file. He confessed that he committed his first crime when he was just 16. Back then, he landed in a correctional facility and learned from older inmates how to stab with a twist, evade a chase, and control people. When he got out, it didn't take him long to put all of that into practice in real life. Right on the train on his way home, among unsuspecting passengers, he took the lives of 3 student construction workers and took their money. This loot was enough for the first few months. The ease of getting money did its job. Guseynov formed a gang involving a friend from the colony and his own brothers. They traveled from region to region, chose their victims, and attacked quickly and quietly. At first, it looked like a series of separate crimes in different regions, but then the clues came together into one bloody pattern. In general, Guseynov was a cold-blooded, calculating and ruthless leader who combined the qualities of an organizer and a sadist. His main traits were absolute power over his accomplices and victims, and a pleasure in his own impunity. He displayed pathological cruelty, taking pleasure in having power over the life and death of his victims, which was vividly demonstrated in the episode where he jumped on the victim's body during a performance. At the same time, he was cold and calculating, carefully planning the crimes and the scheme for reselling stolen cars. His authority among his accomplices was absolute and maintained through fear. Even his own partners were afraid of him, knowing that he had no restraints and was capable of eliminating anyone. However, there was another human side to him, which in our chronology appeared only once, when he met his son. The birth of his son became an emotional breakthrough and made him, a hardened and seasoned criminal, agree to cooperate with the investigation. This episode shows that even in the most hardened, deprived soul, there can remain something vulnerable, a longing for a normal life and human attachments. But that spark quickly faded, and in the end, he remained in his role, which I will talk about a bit later. Alexei Dolgov and the other accomplices exemplify followers who just obey orders. Their psychology is a mix of fear, greed, and susceptibility to the influence of a stronger leader. Alexei Dolgov, once caught in the field of evil and under investigation, quickly broke down, afraid of being eliminated as an unnecessary witness. His behavior demonstrates a lack of any loyalty or personal convictions. He is driven by the instinct of self-preservation. The other members of the gang, including the Guseynov brothers, by the way, in some sources he's Guseynov, in others Guseynov, but for us he's Guseynov. So, the other members of the gang, including the Guseynov brothers, were obedient cogs in his mechanism. They obeyed out of fear, and their own boldness instantly evaporated. At the very first encounter with justice, when they started testifying against each other, the trial was exemplary. Guseynov and his accomplice Dolgov were sentenced to execution, while the other members of the gang received 15 years of strict regime imprisonment. However, the death sentences were never carried out as a moratorium came into effect, and the execution was replaced with life imprisonment. Since then, Guseynov has been behind bars, writing complaints and petitions, trying to appeal the sentence. He still hopes for freedom even though he has dozens of lives behind him, ruined by a knife strike with a cold twist. Through robberies, assaults, and car thefts, by the standards of those years, they made a fortune. Money came easily, and went just as easily on restaurants, mistresses, and the good life. But none of this brought Guseynov happiness. Now he's behind bars, writing pointless complaints, and remembering not the fights or the money, but that one day when he saw his son in the detention center. The only woman he ever loved was left on the outside, alone, without money or a man's support. She is raising the child on her own, and as the sons say, the neighbors haven't mentioned his name in a long time. What do you think about this story? Leave your comments, like or dislike, and watch other videos on the channel while both the videos and the channel are still available.